There's a strange and heartbreaking moment that happens in many women's lives, though few talk about it openly. It often arrives quietly, in the middle of a weeknight, when you're brushing your teeth or scrolling through your phone before bed. Maybe it comes when you catch your reflection in a bathroom mirror, or when you sit alone in your car after a long day. It's that moment when you suddenly realize you don't quite recognize the person staring back at you. You're still in a relationship. Maybe it's one you once prayed for. Maybe it's the kind of love story you thought would open you up, expand you, awaken all the best parts of you. But somewhere along the line, without conscious intention, you began shrinking. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else could notice. It was subtle, almost elegant, in the way women are taught to make themselves smaller without making a scene. At first you didn't see it. How could you? It's easy to miss the disappearing when it happens one small concession at a time. One moment you stop suggesting what you actually want for dinner because it's easier to just go along. Another moment, you stop texting your best friend back right away because you don't want your partner to think you're distracted. Then, almost imperceptibly, you shelve the things that once made you feel alive. That pottery class you loved, the yoga studio you used to go to, that half-finished book you swore you'd publish one day. Nothing felt like a sacrifice at first. You told yourself it was compromise. You told yourself it was maturity. You told yourself this is what building a life with someone looks like. And to be fair, some of that was true. Love does require flexibility. But what no one teaches you is how quickly flexibility turns into erasure if you don't pay attention. Or how compromise can transform into quiet self-abandonment so seamlessly that you don't feel the shift until years later, when the ache of emptiness begins to spread like a bruise beneath your ribs. If you're honest, there were signs. You could feel yourself becoming more invested in your partner's preferences, moods, schedules, and triggers than in your own. You started choosing peace over authenticity, harmony over honesty. You silenced your no because you feared conflict more than resentment. And resentment did come, slowly, then heavily, like wet clothes you couldn't peel off. You found yourself lying awake, overwhelmed by a sense of invisibility, not because he wasn't looking at you, but because you weren't there to be seen. This is the core tragedy of self-abandonment. You disappear from your own life long before anyone else notices you're gone. And what makes it even more painful is the paradox that fuels it. Many women abandon themselves as an attempt to secure love. They believe, often unconsciously, that being easy, agreeable, selfless, or endlessly accommodating will make them more lovable. They think that if they give enough, bend enough, soften enough, they will earn the affection they're terrified of losing. But in reality, the more you disappear, the less there is of you for someone to actually love. You can't maintain intimacy when one person is slowly fading out of view. Sometimes the realization hits you during an argument. You hear yourself apologizing even when you know you weren't wrong. You feel your words getting smaller, your body tighter, your voice weaker. Or maybe it hits you on a random Tuesday afternoon when you can't decide what you want for lunch because you've forgotten how to hear your own preferences. Or a friend asks how you're doing and you answer automatically, "I'm fine," even though you feel like a stranger living inside your own skin. And if we go even deeper, what hurts the most isn't the relationship itself. It's that internal betrayal, the slow internal turning away from the person you once were. The version of you who had opinions, dreams, edges, boundaries, a voice. That girl who had fire. That girl who knew herself. That girl who never watered herself down to make someone else comfortable. Somewhere along the way, you stopped choosing her. You didn't notice when it happened, but you felt it. You felt the soft pressure to be agreeable, to not ask for too much, to not be difficult. You felt the fear of being misunderstood or rejected. You felt the anxiety of disappointing someone you loved. So you did what women have been conditioned for generations to do. You erased just enough of yourself to survive the moment. Then you did it again, and again, until the habit became identity. If any part of this feels painfully, achingly familiar, I want you to know one thing with absolute clarity. This is not a personal flaw. You didn't wake up one day and decide to abandon your own voice. This pattern has roots, deep ones, woven into your childhood, your attachment history, your family dynamics, your culture, your gendered conditioning, and even your nervous system. There is a reason this feels natural. There is a reason you slip into it so effortlessly. Your mind learned at some early point in your life that disappearing was safer than being fully seen. And once that belief takes hold, it follows you into every romantic relationship you enter until you decide to break the pattern. But breaking it starts with naming it. And that's what this first chapter is for. Lifting the veil on the pattern you've been living in, recognizing the ways you've slowly drifted away from yourself, seeing the places where you traded authenticity for attachment, acknowledging the grief of losing your own reflection. Because when you can finally say, yes, I see what's happening, and I see what I've lost, then, and only then, can you begin the journey home. In the next section, we're going to peel back the layers and look at why women lose themselves so easily in love. We're going to go back to the original coding, the childhood blueprints, the attachment wounds, the fawn response, the cultural programming, so you can understand exactly where this pattern began. And once you understand the origins, you can finally begin to rewrite them. Before a woman ever abandons herself in love, she learns somewhere, long before adulthood, that her own needs are negotiable. Sometimes she learns it through chaos, sometimes through silence, sometimes through the quiet, unspoken rules of the household she grew up in. But almost always, the training begins in childhood, long before she has language for what she's losing. Long before she knows that the way she's learning to love will one day become the way she disappears. If you look closely at your earliest memories, you might notice the first faint outlines of the pattern. Maybe you were the child who felt responsible for keeping the peace. Maybe you sensed tension in the air before anyone spoke a word. Maybe you learned to read your parents' moods the way other children learned to read storybooks. You noticed the sharpness in a voice, the heaviness in a sigh, the shifting weather inside the adults who were supposed to make you feel safe. And without anyone ever telling you to, you became vigilant. This hyper-awareness wasn't weakness, it was intelligence. It was survival. A child doesn't have power, so she adapts. She learns that softness must be measured, that anger must be swallowed, that disappointment must be hidden, that joy must be convenient. She learns that the safest version of herself is the one that creates the least conflict. So she shrinks. She bends. She becomes agreeable, helpful, quiet, easy. She discovers, long before she can articulate it, that love is something she earns through self-abandonment. And for many women, this becomes their first operating system. It's the anxious child watching a parent withdraw emotionally, trying to figure out what she did wrong. It's the daughter who learned that being too much earned disapproval. It's the girl who was praised for being obedient, not expressive. It's the teenager who became the emotional support for a struggling parent, carrying burdens that were never hers to hold. Over time, the message sinks in. I am valued for what I provide, not for who I am. Those early dynamics form what psychologists call attachment. But you don't need academic language to understand it. Attachment is simply the blueprint for how we expect love to feel. If love felt inconsistent, you learn to brace yourself. If love felt conditional, you learn to perform. If love felt unpredictable, you learn to walk on eggshells. And if love felt like caretaking, you learn that being needed is safer than being known. When a partner enters your adult life, your nervous system doesn't see a partner. It sees the past. It sees the old emotional equations written in invisible ink. It sees the old survival strategies rising from the depths. That is why the fear of conflict can feel like a threat. That is why a disappointed look can shut you down. That is why saying no feels dangerous, even when nothing is actually at stake. Your body remembers everything you had to do to stay safe when you were young. And perhaps the most misunderstood piece of this puzzle is something trauma therapists call the fawn response. Most people know about fight, flight, and freeze. Fawn is the fourth option, one especially common in women who grow up needing to manage the emotional climate around them. Fawning is the instinct to appease, to soothe, to disappear, to mold yourself into whatever shape will prevent rejection or anger. It's a trauma response masquerading as kindness. It's self-protection disguised as devotion. You may not know you're fawning when you're doing it. It feels automatic. It feels like the right thing to do. You step into the caretaker role before you even notice the impulse. You soften your tone, your needs, your edges. You make yourself small so someone else can feel big. You try to preemptively solve problems that aren't yours. You apologize for things you didn't do. You smile when you're hurt. You say you're okay when you're not. You become the soothing balm for everyone else's discomfort, even if it means burning yourself to give them warmth. And because this adaptive behavior once protected you, your mind clings to it as if your life still depends on it. But adulthood changes the equation. What was once a brilliant survival strategy becomes a quiet prison. The things you did to stay safe as a child become the very things that make you invisible as a woman. The emotional hypervigilance that once helped you anticipate danger now leads you to monitor every shift in your partner's mood. The instinct to shrink yourself now makes you a stranger to your own desires. The skill of reading others deeply now prevents you from allowing anyone to read you at all. When you look at self-abandonment through this lens, it begins to make sense in a way that feels both painful and relieving. Painful because you see how long you've been carrying the weight of a childhood that taught you to disappear. Relieving because you finally understand that the pattern isn't proof of your inadequacy. It's proof of how well you adapted. There is nothing wrong with you. Your emotional reflexes are not flaws. They are echoes. They are ghosts of a little girl who learned that the safest way to be loved was to not take up too much space. But here's the truth that adulthood grants you. You are no longer that child. You are allowed to take up space now. You are allowed to have needs, opinions, boundaries, contradictions. You are allowed to be loved without performing. You are allowed to be held without disappearing. And this is why we must talk about the cultural layer of this pattern. The good woman script that reinforces your early wounds and keeps the fawn response alive long after the danger has passed. Because even if your childhood taught you to abandon yourself, the world you grew up in taught you that self-abandonment is admirable. In the next part, we're going to explore that cultural conditioning, the stories, the roles, the expectations that shaped you into someone who believed that disappearing was virtuous. And once we see that layer clearly, you'll understand not only where the pattern began, but why it became so easy to keep repeating. And that's the first step in finally breaking it. Long before a woman ever loses herself in a relationship, she is already handed a script. It doesn't come wrapped in clear instructions or labeled explicitly as a role, but it is everywhere. In the stories she grows up with, the compliments she receives, the comments she overhears, the expectations quietly placed on her shoulders. It lives in the way adults praise her for being sweet, calm, compliant, and helpful. It lives in the way people frown when she is loud, opinionated, or unwilling to bend. It exists in the subtle double standard that follows girls into adolescence and then into adulthood, teaching them that being a good woman often means being less of themselves. This script is ancient, older than any one family or country. Its roots stretch through centuries of cultural norms that positioned women as caretakers, peacemakers, emotional anchors, and moral centers of the household. Even though modern society claims to value independence, ambition, and assertiveness in women, the underlying narrative hasn't disappeared. It has simply become more disguised. Today's good woman is expected to be selfless, but still effortlessly beautiful. Nurturing, but never demanding. Strong, but not intimidating. Loving, but never needy. Accommodating, but somehow also empowered. The contradictions are impossible. Yet women internalize them anyway, because they were raised in a world that ties their worth to how easy they are to love. This is the trap, the belief that shrinking yourself is noble, that silence is maturity, that accommodating everything is the price of being adored, that love thrives when you disappear just enough to make the other person more comfortable. If you think back to the moments when you first started molding yourself in past relationships, it probably didn't feel like self-erasure. Maybe it felt thoughtful. Maybe it felt romantic. Maybe it felt like emotional generosity. You learned quickly that relationships run smoother when you anticipate his needs, regulate his emotions, adjust your tone, soften your reactions, and forgive his inconsistencies. You learned that being agreeable earned praise, while asserting your needs created tension. And tension, for someone conditioned to keep the peace, feels unbearable. So you adapted. Every time you wanted to say, "I don't like that," but stayed quiet, you were obeying the script. Every time your body felt a no, but your mouth delivered a sure, "That's fine," you were honoring the role. Every time you minimized your accomplishments so he wouldn't feel insecure, or pretended not to care when something hurt you, or hid a part of yourself because you feared being judged or abandoned, you weren't being weak. You were being what the world told you to be. You can see this script reflected everywhere in pop culture. Romantic comedies still teach women that their highest achievement is being chosen. Disney princesses are rescued into love, rewarded for kindness, for patience, for waiting. Women who assert boundaries are villainized or turned into jokes. Women who prioritize themselves are painted as cold, selfish, or too much. Even in modern relationships, men who are assertive are called leaders. Women who are assertive are told they're difficult. Men who speak their needs are confident. Women who do the same are labeled dramatic or needy. All of these messages accumulate inside a woman's psyche and form a quiet internal commandment. If you want to be loved, make yourself easy to love. And the definition of easy to love often looks like disappearing just enough to never create discomfort. This is why so many women confuse love with self-sacrifice. Why they think relationship harmony requires their silence. Why they believe that being low maintenance is the virtue that will protect them. Why they interpret boundary setting as cruelty and self-prioritization as selfishness. The trap is so deep that some women genuinely believe that their needs are burdens, that their emotions are inconveniences, that their desires are optional. But the cost of being the good woman is steep. It requires a woman to amputate parts of herself to fit into a version of love that was never designed with her wholeness in mind. It asks her to curate herself so thoroughly that she becomes a watered-down version of who she was meant to be. And eventually, after bending for so long, she forgets what the unbent version of herself even looked like. What's painful is that the people around her often reward her for this erasure. A partner may say, "I love how easy you are." Friends may comment, "You're so chill." Family members may praise her for being the responsible one, the dependable one, the emotionally strong one who holds everything together. She is admired for her flexibility, her resilience, her quiet competence, her emotional labor. And because the world applauds the role she plays, she blends further into it. But applause is not love. Approval is not nourishment. The good woman trap gives validation, but it steals identity. It gives short-term harmony, but destroys long-term connection. Because no relationship, no matter how promising, can survive when one person slowly disappears. Love cannot thrive where authenticity is forbidden. And a partner cannot truly know a woman who is constantly editing herself for the sake of being accepted. The tragedy is that many women don't realize how much of themselves they've surrendered until they feel a strange, hollow ache inside. It's not heartbreak. It's not loneliness. It's a quiet grief for the self they abandoned. A grief for the dreams they paused. A grief for the boundaries they swallowed. A grief for the version of themselves who once existed before the world taught them that being loved and being themselves were incompatible goals. But the beauty of this realization is that it marks a turning point. The moment a woman recognizes the cultural conditioning she's been living under, she begins to see the pattern not as destiny, but as programming. And programming can be rewritten. In the next part, we're going to explore what happens when this programming is carried into adulthood, and how it shapes the dynamics, the behaviors, and the emotional patterns that make self-abandonment feel like love, even when it's actually the opposite. Because the story isn't over. It's just beginning to unfold in a new, more honest light. By the time a woman reaches adulthood, the pattern no longer feels like a pattern. It feels like her personality. It feels like her loving nature, her empathy, her desire to help, her ability to understand others so deeply that she forgets she is also someone who needs understanding. The childhood training, the cultural messaging, the fawn response, everything blends together until self-abandonment becomes so instinctive that she doesn't see it as abandonment at all. She sees it as devotion. And when this woman steps into a relationship, that devotion becomes the blueprint she brings with her. It begins subtly, in small interactions that look harmless on the surface. She walks into love with an open heart and the best intentions, believing that if she gives enough, supports enough, stays patient enough, the relationship will thrive. She doesn't realize that she is already stepping into the familiar role she learned long ago. The role of caretaker, fixer, stabilizer, emotional barometer. At first, it feels good. It feels like purpose. It feels like connection. She becomes deeply attuned to her partner's emotional landscape, reading his expressions, monitoring his tone, sensing his stress before he names it. She believes this level of sensitivity is intimacy, and in a way, it is. But it is a one-sided intimacy, one where she knows him deeply, while he knows only the version of her who keeps her own needs carefully tucked away. She stops noticing when she begins adjusting herself to maintain harmony. She softens her truth. She edits her reactions. She withholds her boundaries. If something hurts, she swallows it. If something feels unfair, she rationalizes it. If something is missing, she tells herself not to be demanding. She becomes the emotional glue, the quiet solution to every tension, the steady presence who holds the relationship afloat. Meanwhile, her own internal world becomes quieter and quieter until she can no longer hear what she wants, what she feels, what she even likes anymore. This is where the betrayal begins, not the trail of a partner, but the betrayal of self. It begins in moments so small she doesn't recognize them. The "it's fine" she says when it's not fine. The plans she cancels to make space for someone who never asked her to sacrifice that much. The decisions she hands over because it feels easier than creating disagreement. The intuitive nudges she ignores because she doesn't trust her own needs enough to give them weight. But the body notices. The body always notices. It stores every unspoken no, every silenced truth, every emotion she pushes down. It keeps score quietly. Tight shoulders, a knot in the stomach, insomnia, irritability, chronic exhaustion. Her body speaks long before she is ready to listen. The more she tries to maintain the illusion of calm within the relationship, the less calm she feels inside. Self-abandonment fractures her sense of self. It creates distance between who she is and who she thinks she needs to be to keep love. And this distance eventually becomes unbearable, not loudly, not in a dramatic outburst, but in the slow, suffocating ache of living half alive. What makes this pattern particularly devastating is how often it attracts emotionally unavailable partners. Not because she consciously chooses them, but because her nervous system recognizes the emotional instability as familiar. A partner who is inconsistent or distant activates the very wound she's been carrying since childhood, the wound of having to earn love. She gravitates toward partners she has to prove herself to, because proving herself is the language of love she learned early on. And inconsistent partners have a way of reinforcing the cycle. When they pull away, she tries harder. When they grow cold, she becomes warmer. When they become distracted, she becomes hyper-present. And every time she stretches herself to fill the gap, she loses another piece of herself. She confuses the emotional roller coaster with chemistry. She confuses longing with connection. She confuses the anxiety of anticipation with passion. She confuses the fawn response with love. This cycle is often mistaken for compatibility, but it is simply reenactment. A reenactment of the child who had to work hard for affection. A reenactment of the girl who believed her worth depended on her ability to make others comfortable. A reenactment of the woman who has never learned to feel safe unless she is performing for love. But even the strongest adaptations eventually exhaust the person holding them. And for many women, the breaking point comes not in a dramatic moment of conflict, but in a quiet realization. It might happen during a conversation where she hears herself apologizing automatically, long before she even knows for what. It might happen during a dinner where she listens to her partner speak for an hour before realizing she hasn't shared a single thing about her day. It might happen when she catches her own reflection, and doesn't see a woman with dreams anymore. Only a woman maintaining the emotional balance of a relationship she's terrified to lose. Or it might come at 2 a.m., when she feels a strange loneliness lying next to someone she loves. A loneliness deeper than anything she felt when she was single. A loneliness that whispers, "I am not being met here, not because he doesn't care, but because I am not even showing up as myself." That moment is the turning point. It is the moment a woman realizes the devastating truth. She has been working so hard to prevent abandonment that she abandoned herself first. She tried so desperately to keep the relationship intact that she forgot she was part of it. She tried so hard to be easy to love that she forgot love requires two whole people, not one whole and one disappearing. And in that realization, something shifts. It may not feel like hope yet, but it feels like awakening. It feels like a doorway opening. It feels like a truth rising from a deep place inside her saying, there has to be another way. That whisper is where healing begins. Because if disappearing is something you learned, then returning is something you can choose. And in the next part, we're going to explore exactly how to make that return. The path back to your voice, your boundaries, your identity, your self-worth, and ultimately, to a love that does not require your disappearance to survive. There is a moment in every woman's healing journey when something inside her refuses to stay silent any longer. It's rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic clarity or sudden confidence. Instead, it arrives like a quiet internal trembling, a subtle awareness that the life she's been living no longer feels like her own. She starts noticing how exhausted she is from holding everything together, how long it's been since she's felt joy without permission, how deeply she misses the parts of herself she buried beneath compromise, fear, and caretaking. And beneath that ache is another one, softer but unmistakable, a longing to come home to herself. The journey back begins in this space, in the recognition that she has been living as a ghost in her own story. For so long she has moved through life in service to connection, harmony, and emotional safety, without ever being asked what she wanted those connections to protect. It takes courage to acknowledge this truth. Because once she sees how profoundly she has abandoned herself, she also begins to see how deeply she desires to return. But returning to yourself is not a single decision. It is not a clean line between before and after. It is a slow unlearning, a peeling back of layers that no longer belong to you, a relearning of the language of your own desires, a reawakening of instincts you've been taught to distrust. It begins with noticing the places where you disappeared, not to judge yourself for them, but to understand why those choices once felt necessary. Because they were necessary. They were strategies designed by an earlier version of you, a version who lacked safety, not strength. Healing starts with awareness, but it doesn't end there. Awareness is the doorway. What happens next is the walk through it. And that walk requires honesty, tenderness, and a kind of courage that grows in the quiet moments when no one else is watching. For many women, this walk begins with learning to hear themselves again. After years of shape-shifting, fawning, and avoiding internal conflict, the inner voice grows faint. Sometimes it's so faint that when someone asks what you want, you freeze. You don't know whether you prefer Thai food or Italian. You don't know if you actually enjoyed the movie your partner loved. You don't know if you're comfortable or just agreeable. You don't know if you're tired or simply used to pushing past exhaustion. The truth has been there all along, buried under years of prioritizing everyone else's comfort. So the first step is simply listening. Listening to the fluttering in your chest, the tightening in your throat, the warmth that rises when something feels right. Listening to what your body has been trying to communicate long before your mind was ready. Listening to discomfort without silencing it. Listening to desire without negotiating it down. Listening to the part of you that remembers who you were before survival strategies became your personality. And once you start listening, something else becomes inevitable. The rediscovery of your needs. Needs you labeled as too much, inconvenient, dramatic, or selfish. Needs you hid to avoid conflict. Needs you suppressed because the world taught you that they were unattractive. But needs are not demands. They are signals. They are the breadcrumb trail leading you back to your authentic self. And acknowledging them is not an act of entitlement. It is an act of truth. As you begin saying those truths quietly to yourself, the next phase begins, saying them out loud. Not as ultimatums, not as emotional outbursts, but as clear expressions of your internal world. This is often the hardest part for a woman who has mastered self-abandonment. Using your voice can feel dangerous, even when nothing is at stake. You may brace yourself for rejection, judgment, or conflict. You may feel guilt rise in your chest simply for asserting something as simple as, "I don't want that." But your voice is the bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. Every time you speak it, you reinforce the truth that your presence in the world matters. From here, boundaries begin to take shape. Not as walls of defensiveness, but as the architecture of your self-respect. Boundaries are not about shutting people out. They are about staying connected to yourself while staying connected to others. They are about refusing to betray your inner world for the sake of external approval. They are about protecting the parts of you that have been neglected. They are the way you teach others and yourself how you deserve to be treated. And as you build these structures within yourself, something extraordinary happens. Your relationship patterns begin to shift. You no longer feel drawn to inconsistency or emotional unavailability, because chaos can no longer masquerade as chemistry. You stop mistaking performance for partnership. You stop confusing fawning with intimacy. You start craving relationships where you can be seen in your entirety, not just the easy, accommodating, conflict-free version of you. Perhaps the most beautiful change is internal. You begin to feel grounded again. You wake up without the familiar sense of emotional dread. You begin to trust yourself to handle conflict without dissolving. You begin to feel proud of yourself, not for being perfect, but for being present. You reconnect with hobbies and passions that once made you feel alive. You spend more time alone and realize solitude isn't scary anymore. It's nourishing. You become someone whose life is full, rooted, and wide, rather than narrow and dependent on someone else's validation. Slowly, you realize that you are no longer living half alive. You are becoming whole again. And in this wholeness, something remarkable becomes possible. Conscious love. A kind of love where you do not shrink, shapeshift, or barter pieces of yourself for security. A love where you can be both held and honest. A love where you can give without disappearing. A love where your needs are not negotiable, your boundaries are not punishments, and your presence is not conditional. A love where two people meet as equals, not one carrying the emotional labor of both. Not every relationship will survive this transformation. That is the truth. But what will survive is you. The real you. The one who has been waiting for years beneath layers of self-protection and silence. The one who remembers what it feels like to stand in your own body. The one who knows that love is not a destination where you lose yourself, but a place you arrive more fully as who you are. Coming home to yourself is not an ending. It is the beginning of the rest of your life. And you are finally ready to live it whole.